Okay, here we are, right back at you. Going to just keep hammering the content here over the next couple days, so hope you are ready. So, this is going to be a really great presentation. Excited to have Adam Miller here from Stanford because of all the great work they do and all the great data they uncover that can help us all. And to share some of that very great data is Adam Miller. And I just want to say this session is being streamed. So if you are watching in the virtual space, we welcome your conversation on Twitter, and don't be afraid to engage in the Q&A when we get to that point. So here he is, Adam Miller, Stanford University.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our session here. Definitely want to once again welcome you to the conference. Once again, Adam Miller here from Stanford University. Again, I oversee the digital team at the Stanford Alumni Association. Stanford is one of those schools where development is a separate unit at Stanford, but we're certainly partners. We work together, we sit in the same building, so we work on a lot of things. So though my focus is a little bit more on engagement, we'll have some fundraising nuggets hopefully along the way here. And you can see some of the ways that we use data and use things even in a fundraising context within the Alumni Association itself as we go. And what I really want to do today is just sort of tell you the story. 10 years is a long time of the relationship model, our behavioral segmentation model of all 217,000 Stanford alumni, and just share with you some of the insights we've learned along the way. So you definitely don't need to do this exercise. You don't need to go through a segmentation exercise. It's great if you do. Please do and share what you learn if you do. But I think you can walk away today without ever having to do this and just take the learning from us, because I think you have the same segments in your audiences and your constituencies that we do. So you learn a little bit more about them today. And like Keith, I would love to give a special welcome to our live stream audience, the folks joining us from wherever they are, joining us here in Miami. And I think you also see, those of you who are in the room, some themes from Brent's discussion earlier about the power of combining social and data. And it's a really exciting front for all of us. And just to make sure that the live stream folks can hear your questions, if you ask a question, and please do at any point during the session, remember to use one of those mics. So we'll try to get you a mic and speak into that so that the live stream folks can hear your question. Without further ado, let's get started. So since 2005, as I mentioned, that's a pretty long time. So I was trying to think what else has been going on since 2005, according to Wikipedia. That's when Ed Sheeran's career started. Doesn't seem that long ago, but he goes back that far. Sports fans and maybe our Wisconsin people in the house, if we have any. So I guess, okay, here we go over here. Aaron Rodgers drafted, what was that, 24th overall in the 2005 NFL draft. He's done pretty well. So How I Met Your Mother started in 2005, if you remember that. That one's actually ended. We beat them just by 1 year. That's pretty good. Good show. And then finally, YouTube itself started in 2005, which is kind of interesting. It's amazing the impact that's had on the world in that time. And I couldn't think of something better than the immortalized Charlie Bit My Finger as a wonderful video. So since 2005, we've been at this. And what we do really is, this is a segmentation model taking all the data that we have in the database that we share with our development office. And the Alumni Association and the development office have shared it for a long time, so there's really a wealth of data in there. And we try to look and see essentially what the relationship is that an alum has with Stanford, right? And that's different. And you know this in your own worlds, that different alums have different relationships with the institution. So that's the essence of behavioral segmentation. You might wonder why behavior versus, say, demographics, right? We often think of demographics, which are also valuable, but in different ways. Our Alumni Association President, Howard, has a great quote on this. He often says, he has a lot more in common with an alum that he meets who might be a younger alum, not that Howard is an older alum, he's a middle, a younger alum that he meets that's, say, from a different region than, say, his exact demographic equal who might live next to him in Palo Alto, but have very different relationship with Stanford, right? So a lot of times the affinity and the relationship with our institution actually trumps demographics. So this was a theme that we were feeling at Stanford. So that led us to behavior, right? So behavior is a different way to do this and hopefully a more accurate way for our world. So we're really looking to understand all of our Stanford alumni in the most Stanford way possible. So we really also in this effort set out to uncover pockets of data from elsewhere at Stanford, right? Think about how much data, to Brent's point of the power of the data in your database, how much data is sort of in Excel spreadsheets around your campus or sitting on someone's desktop or just isn't out there, isn't coded into your alumni database. So this was part of this effort to go out and find that data, athletics, continuing studies, wherever that was, to put this into the central database so that not only we could use it for this effort, but others could use it also, right? So we embarked on finding all of these behaviors, and you'll see a list of these up here: attend, donate, volunteer, recruit, open, email, search. We have row, hike, and ski, which you might wonder about. That's because we have the Stanford Sierra Camp. I don't know if you've ever been there, but that's kind of a nice place. So we have a program dedicated to that. Of course, social media behaviors, tweeting, right, commenting, sports fans who root, submitters, mentors, people who hold our membership card. We have a wealth of behaviors. So if you think about it this way, it starts to be a good lens to look at to understand what folks do and don't do with your institution. Once again, this is how we articulate the big goal of what we're trying to do, not just with this effort, not with the relationship model only, but also with everything we do digitally and actually beyond at the Stanford Alumni Association, right? And that goal is help alumni have the relationship they want to have with Stanford, right? So if you look at that, help alumni have the relationship they want to have with Stanford. If you look at that, you can kind of parse that out into, okay, well, what is that relationship? How do we understand that relationship? That brings us back to the data, right? They want to have, what do you think they want to have is going to mean over time? There are times people get busy, right? And they want a little bit of a lighter relationship. There are times when, in Brent's example of the professor or the important person passing away, that they may suddenly, due to an event outside of anyone's control, have a lot of affinity and come back, right? So what is relationship they want at that time? It means you kind of need to know this time element in addition to the data about them. It means you need to have a rich amount of interest data. How do you understand the interests, that are very dynamic in our world? Just think about the different things you're going to be interested in from when you got up this morning to when you go to bed at night. It changes all the time, very dynamic, which is another reason why social is very exciting for this, to really understand someone's dynamic interests, right, with your institution. And then what relationship they want to have with Stanford. So that's going to be institution as a whole. There are some people who might only engage with athletic-related things. There are some people who might only donate, right? There are some people who might never donate. You can act upon any and all of those relationships, right? But the first step is understanding it. So that's what we set out to do. So how the heck do we do these kinds of things? What we did is we kind of took all that data that we could find in the database, once again, cobbling the old Excel spreadsheets where they were and got them coded in the central database, and then essentially laid those behaviors all out onto a table, right? And then started categorizing the behaviors. So we haven't categorized the people yet, we've categorized the behaviors. So what do some behaviors have in common with other ones? And we did find some themes in there, and here are the themes that you'll see. Social, right? Some part of Stanford, an activity that relates to your social life at Stanford, right? So that's not just sort of the parties or the cocktails and that sort of thing, but that's also the community kind of behaviors, a lot of events and that sort of thing, class book page submissions, lots of other kinds of events even outside of the Alumni Association that might be about a community, a diversity center, a school, right? Banner carriers are the folks who, those are the behaviors where you're taking on the fate of Stanford to some extent, right? You're volunteering, you're doing something to help move Stanford forward. By the way, all of these categories really have some engagement component and some giving component. So there are two kind of pieces to that. It doesn't like giving will get you into one segment or engaging gets you into another. We try to look at it neutral from that perspective. Quid pro quo is kind of a value exchange. What are some behaviors that they might do for the value they get or the edge that their Stanford connection gives them? So we put all these sort of behaviors together, and then we align them based on the sort of the business lens from Stanford, right? If I go back a second, this is sort of the anthropological look, right? And we can use this right out of the bat. Isn't it interesting to know who of your constituents may be engaging in only quid pro quo kinds of behaviors? Maybe they only do the career networking kind of stuff, right? Maybe they only go for the discounts you can give them from some of your programs, something very value exchange. It's interesting to know that for marketing opportunities, you immediately know if you have something else new, a new program that you're offering that actually is like that. You have an immediate group of people you can go after, right? But it's also good to know kind of what they do in that behavior versus other ones. We have people who do, multiple behaviors. So it's also good to know who's only doing a quid pro quo behavior. Interesting to know who's doing social, banner carrier, owner kinds of behaviors. So you can learn a lot immediately about them. And there's no value judgment in this. There's no better behavior than another kind, right? So whatever behavior you're doing, we just kind of want to understand it, help give you the information about that behavior so that we can keep you doing it if you want to do it, and inform you about other kinds of things that you can do with Stanford if you don't know about them, right? The order comes in where we say, well, if we had, our choice, would we want all alums at the most engaged level? Of course, right? Is that going to happen? Probably not. But we order this, and you see them kind of in a circle here around with owner as the most engaged segment, banner carrier next, social, intellectual, quid pro quo, cardinal spirit, steady donor, remote, and in the ether as the least engaged segment. So this is sort of the continuum. Before, when I had this, you could fall into multiple segments, right? You could have done a banner carrier behavior. You could have done a quid pro quo behavior. You could have done a remote behavior. And that's fine, and we'll understand more about you. But once we order it, you can only fall in one place, right? So as the alum, if I've done a social behavior, a banner carrier behavior, and an owner behavior, I will fall into the highest segment, engagement-wise, that I qualify for. So in that case, if I've done all three, I will actually be counted as an owner, right? So as we talk today, you can think of these segments, someone in the quid pro quo segment has done quid pro quo behaviors. They might have done cardinal spirit, steady donor, remote behaviors. They might have done behaviors farther down the segmentation model, but they've never ever done something that would qualify them for a higher, more engaged segment in the model, right? Which is really interesting. And by the way, these sizes, and I can move on to the colored slide so you can see it a little better. These segments, the circle sizes actually represent the sizes of the segments in real life. So you can see that it's interesting that we have some of these big segments who've never ever done any other kind of behavior that would qualify them for a higher point in the model. So immediately we're discovering some things about people that we don't really see at events, right? Folks down on this end of the segmentation model, we don't see them. So we have the risk of thinking that everybody we see and we interact with and engage with, often from the Alumni Association, could fall into these segments and give us a little bit of a distorted view of who the alums are. So this has helped us, in a sense, discover new areas. It's almost sort of like, imagine you're looking through a telescope. It's like those really distant planets that look like a little speck when they're a star. You can't see them with the naked eye. You start to get a little bit more resolution of these things that are sort of out there, and we're always out there. You just didn't know they were out there. So that's what I'm going to tell you a little bit more about as we have learned more about these segments over time. By the way, you all have a handout, I believe, that you can take with you. That includes this, so you get a better view of that diagram, and then also some segment descriptions on the back, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those. Just real quick, what have we done practically with this model over this time that we've been doing this program? We use it for all kinds of things, so targeted marketing. So again, if we're either creating a new program, or we have a new marketing campaign effort, or we're revising a marketing campaign effort for engagement, we would use this to sort of identify that audience, who's your best customer for that particular offer. Program development, thinking about our investment across the organization. We look at all of our programs serving just certain segments, as one of the other segments maybe not getting engaged. Not getting funds, that are program funds dedicated to that segment because they don't really show up at what we do. So that's been very helpful. Survey analysis is pretty interesting to not only see how people respond and what the demographics of the people that respond to our surveys, but then look at them by behavior, right? You can see what an owner might say, right, over here in the most engaged side of the model versus what a remote might say over here on this side of the model. That's been helpful. Customer service. Donor models for our one fundraising effort within the Alumni Association that's for the Stanford magazine. And overall, these names that you're going to start to get to know a little bit today have been a common language for not only the Alumni Association, but other parts of the university, right? So we get to kind of use this common language and talk to other schools and other departments and other units about these terms to sort of help people distill a lot of this alumni data down into some names that are quick, easier to remember. You get a sense of who these segments are over time, and there are some consistencies to those patterns, which is helpful. So let me take you just through real quick. I'll introduce you to each of these segments just so you know the terms and you know who they are. And then we'll go through and do a little look at some insight. So the owners they are the most engaged alums that we have at Stanford. They can be engaged via high levels of giving or high levels of time, right? It's not either. You don't have to do both of them. You can do either of them. But it's essentially magnitude of behavior. They sort of take on the fate of Stanford in what they do and how they feel. Banner carriers are sort of the next level of that, but not quite to the magnitude of owners. Owners might be club presidents or donating large amounts or all these sorts of things. Banner carriers are doing this same themes, but maybe in smaller magnitude ways. So we have a larger group of banner carriers, but a lot of people who feel very invested in the fate of Stanford and take that on in what they do with the university. Socials, our biggest segment, again, the social life, strong community of Stanford, your own individual communities or the Alumni Association community as a whole. Intellectuals, kind of what it sounds like, topical, people with topical interest, people who really try to, if they think about a topic, maybe climate change, they'll look to Stanford to learn more about that topic. Not necessarily about the people who will be there that they'll meet at that time, but maybe more about the topic. Quid pro quo, I mentioned earlier, the value exchange, the networking value. Cardinal spirit is sort of, I think you all have this segment in your own constituents. It's what we call the card-carrying member, the person who might be displaying that Stanford swag, out there, which is kind of fun on their license plate frames or their coffee mugs, or have that pride. It would be a different mascot for everybody. But we know they're out there, and we have some various ways. That's our fan segment as well. Steady donors are to be read as only steady donors. So these are people who have given steadily to Stanford 3 of the last 5 fiscal years, but have never done any other behavior with Stanford that would qualify them for a higher place in the model. So that's kind of interesting. So they're people who are only donating, right, which is great, but they really have never taken us up on pretty much every traditional alumni association activity, right? So that brings up a lot of interesting possibilities of what you do with those folks. Finally, remotes and in the ethers. Remotes are very interesting. They're not emotionally remote. They're not geographically remote. They're people who do more passive activities with Stanford. They're definitely doing stuff with Stanford. They feel good about Stanford, but again, never participate in the activities you would think of with an alumni association. And then finally, in the ether, the folks that we have no address for, we can't contact them, and they've never done any behavior with us over their alumni life. Okay? Questions about that so far? Yeah.
An example of remote, please.
Sorry, one more time.
Can you give an example about a remote?
Yeah, what a remote might be. Yeah, it might be someone who, question was, can you give an example of a remote? What might that person be, right? Imagine, say, a grad alum who lives in the Midwest who reads their magazine regularly, reads the Stanford magazine, might click and log in to the website, consume content, certainly could be on social media. They're out there, but they've never come to any events. They've maybe given us their email address. They've given us some basic information, but never really taken the next step of a behavior. Or small passive behaviors, I would say. And not just virtual behaviors. We're careful to try to not make a segment about virtual or not. So they could be small passive, small in-person or virtual behaviors that they do. Sometimes it's as simple as answering a survey. That's something that remotes do, though in smaller numbers than the more engaged segments. Good question. Other questions at this point about what this is or what it is? Yep. Oh, we get her.
Say like about the numbers of people that are in these groups roughly?
You just repeat
Yep.
the question.
I can tell the bubbles signifies the size.
Yep. Yeah, what are the relative sizes was the question of the segments in terms of numbers. So about 217,000 overall. So, that would put, I don't have all the numbers in front of me here, but, social is probably about in the 80,000 range. Remotes, I think, are maybe 60 to 80, somewhere in there. Remotes are probably more in the 30,000, same for quid pro quo. And then when you get down to owners and intellectuals, I think we're down more in the 5,000 range. That gives you a relative sense. But check with me later. I can get you more specifics if you're interested. Other questions on what this is, why we use it? Okay, yeah, Elise.
So I assume you're using this internally, but has this linked to alumni? And I mean, are alumni talking about this?
That's a great question. So, so the question was, it's an internal use, right? But has it ever leaked out to alumni? Do alumni know we're using this? Do alumni know? Who knows who's on the live stream audience, by the way? I don't know. Might be today we leak it. But it's interesting. I was doing a presentation early on that involved some of our emeriti, alumni board of directors, and an emeritus president from Stanford. And that was first question he asked. It's like, what would you do when an alum comes and says, where do I fall in here? Or they find out where they fall and they say, why do I fall in there? So definitely more for internal use. But it's something where it's important that we don't put any value judgment on it. We just try to say it's the behavior it's your behavioral profile so far, which can always be changed and evolved, right? So if it leaks out there, it's just a reflection of sort of your behavioral profile. I do believe in freedom of information. So I think if an alum asked us and wanted to know where they fall, we'd absolutely tell them and can tell them why. But it's sort of to say to that alum, how can we best understand the kinds of things you do with Stanford and give you the best of what you want and not give you what you don't want, right? Because that's what's been a real struggle. We've been kind of one size fits all over time. So we're sending a lot of people, I'll mention back to this group of steady donors. Again, they're the only steady donors. They're sending in, say, their checks regularly, but every time we ask them, hey, come to this reunion event, hey, come to this social event, come to this athletics event, they're not taking us up on that. So that's kind of interesting. They're voting with their feet that they don't really want to do those activities. So then it becomes a question to us, should we keep asking them? Do we keep mailing to them? Do we keep emailing to them about those things? So that's something we've done very tactically at Stanford, is started to take people out because the behavior is really pretty consistent over here on this side of the model. So we will take, say, remote, steady donors, Cardinal Spirit, out of some of our marketing, offers because of that. So hopefully over time we could say to that alum too, we hope that we're starting to tune what we send you to really get better. It's a little bit like Amazon or Netflix. We're trying to get that algorithm working a little bit better so we give you what you want and not what you don't want. We're still going to be wrong plenty of the time as we keep tuning, but the more we do this kind of stuff, the more we can do that. Good question. Other questions at this point? All right, let me share with you just a few insights that we had. Hopefully these are learnings that you can take with you. So one thing, let me focus on this side of the model. This is, again, the more engaged side, the owners, the banner carriers, and the socials. We find that frequently more than 95% of event attendees come from these 3 segments. So 9 segments across the model, right? And 95% or more often of our event attendees come from these 3 segments. So that gives you a lot you can work with right away, because in your marketing offers, you can think about who you're targeting. You can try to figure out understanding why the other segments aren't coming. We tried some experiments over the years to try and say, is it just the way we're talking about these events? Or the way we talk about things? Is it a marketing challenge, in other words? To try to say, if we talk about this in a more remote kind of friendly way, maybe that we'll get more remotes to it. Probably not. It's probably more about the actual offering itself that we're doing. So this leads us to believe maybe we need some more programming, some new kinds of programming, new things we do that will then interest and attract remotes to engage with the Alumni Association. Once again, a little plug back for social media. One of the areas we've found where we can find remotes and engage with them is social media, right? And this is suddenly like, what a windfall for us to find this or to have this come our way. Because program development is expensive, as you know. If we had to make big, expensive events for remotes, but they're just remote events instead of socials or banner carrier events, that would be hard and that would be expensive. But social media is ending up a way that's really quick, easy, Certainly it isn't no resources, as you all know. It's about dedicating some staff time. It's some budget you need as well. But we can quickly, and in a high-touch way, reach out to folks over social media. You can actually, you can find a remote in your database, and you can go out and see if that remote, by name, is blogging. Are they tweeting? If they are, what are they tweeting about? You can immediately learn more about them and kind of start engaging them based on what they're actually doing right now instead of what you think they're going to want to do, right? So, okay, so that's our owners, banner carriers, and socials. I told you about steady donors earlier. Usually when I talk about this, I ask, which segment out of all of these do you think is the most satisfied with Stanford? And few people guess that it's actually these steady donors over here, right? They are the most satisfied when we ask and research of all these segments in the model, right? It isn't owners. Owners are the ones who have hot blood. You know, they're going to be really excited about some things and really not excited about other things, but they feel very strongly. These study donors are out here a ways, kind of in that solar system model. They're kind of farther away, so maybe the feelings don't run quite as strong. And also, if they're the ones who are giving, you know, sending in those checks, and we keep sending the wrong offers to them, they're the most satisfied. All we're going to do is start to eke away at that satisfaction. So we don't want to do that. So once again, take them out of the offers that don't make sense, give them the relationship that they want to have with Stanford. And then there's the flip side. There are owners who don't give, right? So that's kind of interesting too. So who are the folks that are the most engaged in our model who have never given to Stanford? So, and what are some possibilities there? Again, we're not the development office, we're separate at Stanford, but it's something we can talk to the development office about and give all this data, send it their way. Again, the common language helps as we talk about this. They see how the Alumni Association looks at the alumni body and can have some interesting conversations. I talked to you about In the Ether as the segment. The In the Ether segment has no contact information on file and has never done any activity with us ever. So this is really our definition of lost. How many of you have some kind of a lost definition, right? Yeah. And so one of the challenges with the lost definition is that lack of contact information isn't always the best measure of who that person is or how engaged they are, because they could be really engaged and have very good reasons that they don't want to have their contact information on file, right? They could work at a hot company and getting all kinds of, you know, whatever that reason is. So this for us has been really helpful to have, okay, there's no contact information on file. And they've never, ever done a behavior with the Alumni Association, really, that would qualify them for any of the other segments. So they're really pretty lost out there. We would love to get them back, but they're pretty lost. The interesting thing is they do pop in every now and then. We think there's some kind of significant other factor where, I don't know if you're a banner carrier remote, you tend to date, you know, banner carriers and owners might date remotes and in the ethers, and then they'll show up in an event together, and that pulls them back into the fold. I don't know if that's what it is, but every now and then they surprise us and they jump back onto the radar. And we love that when that happens. That's a good point. Alicia said when they want their kids to go to Stanford. That's a great point. Very much so. So what are those triggers in their life that change? Question way in the back there.
Thinking when you're talking about people in the ether and they might be engaged in what they're considered lost, maybe they're engaged in social media. Conceptually, this representation that you have, is there like really a version of this that's like more like a Venn diagram? Where these circles are overlaying, like where you've got people engaged in social, but they're over there in the ether.
Yep, great question. So the question is, so when you think about social, is it sort of a Venn diagram where you look at someone who has a lot of social engagement, right, and then sort of compare that to the behavioral? So if they're not so engaged behaviorally with us, are they highly engaged on social, right? Is that correct? Yeah, so exactly. The way I like to look at it is sort of two layers, if you will. One is the behavioral layer, so it's all the stuff that we know that they've done with Stanford, right? So this is what's in our alumni database plus what else we've gotten from campus, but what we know they've done with Stanford. And then there's sort of this interest layer that we can put on top of that, right? Their interest layer is just what they care about and what they're doing at any given time, kind of from the interest side. And you put that interest layer together with the behavior and you get a really rich picture of who they are. So in the old days, back to, you know, paper and the things we, you know, what did we get? We got interest information from them maybe every 5 years when we had reunions and they had to fill out a form and, hey, what do you care about? What are you interested in? What are you talking to your friends about, right? It was sort of, it gets stale, right? So it gets entered into the database and so on and so forth. But nowadays, you know, it's just happening all the time. It's happening right now with all of you. It's happening out there in the world with all of our constituents. So you can get this real-time look. So the goal is then to have behavior be the base, but then to overlay that interest right on there. So not only would that be that they're engaging with social, but what specifically topically they're engaging with, right? So I kind of want to know, out of these remotes, what are they really interested in about Stanford? I think that's where we're going to start to see some really interesting subsegments of remotes to sort of say, hey, this remote is interested in this topic that's going on or research at Stanford, and you can marry that with all kinds of engagement possibilities. So that's really exciting. And that's where we have had some success in social. Other questions? Good one. All right. So, so that's In the Ether. Got to know a little bit about them. The remotes I'm just fascinated by. I think they're probably our #1 discovery in this whole effort. Just knowing who these folks are. Again, that size of that segment is 30,000 plus, so it's a pretty good size of alums. They're not geographically or emotionally remote, as I said. It's funny, we have about 240 when we did an analysis that we found work on campus every day. So they're staff at Stanford. They're coming there every day, maybe too much familiarity with Stanford. I don't know what it is, but they're coming to Stanford every day, but they've never done a tradition, an activity with the Alumni Association that would qualify them for a higher point in the segment. So what do you do with them, right? What do? Do you try and catch them as they're driving in and they're commuting? I don't know. Have a happy hour at the mixer right after work? What it is, it's really something different, right? It's some different kind of engagement that we're going to have to bring to these folks to engage them. Once again, back to social, because they are showing up there. Speaking of remotes, again, another insight we found, 40% of owners and banner carriers say social media has increased their interest in reunion homecoming. This is our annual alumni day when alumni come back to come back to campus in 5-year chunks in terms of their class year. So 40% of owners and banner carriers say social media has increased their interest in reunion homecoming. What percentage of remotes do you think social media has increased their interest in reunion homecoming? 5 over here. Guesses? Lower than 40%, we think? Yeah? Any other guesses? 5. So it was actually 0. 0% of remotes, when we surveyed them, said social media has increased interest in reunion homecoming. So that's pretty interesting. And the flip side of that is 26% of remotes say that, getting in touch with Stanford, social media has increased their interest in getting in touch with Stanford professors, right? Versus a whopping 5% of owners and banner carriers. So we are seeing these differences, right? We're seeing differences in what they want to do. And social media itself is actually driving different kinds of interest, right? Based on what the segments want. So that's a pretty useful tidbit for us. So this is encouraging. So how do we take advantage of triggers? Elise had mentioned when their kids are applying to Stanford. So this is something that we really think is interesting. What does cause someone to either stay in one of those segments their whole life or to move within the segmentation model? So we actually did some separate research on this. We called them jumpers if they're kind of jumping from one segment to another. So if you're a remote and you pop up into Steady Donor, Cardinal Spirit, somewhere else, you've jumped that segment, right? So we surveyed them and found that 75% of those, of the ones under 45, said it was due to a life change versus something Stanford did, essentially. So it isn't necessarily a change in our marketing or the way we're talking to them. Maybe 25% of them, which is encouraging, but mostly it's a life change. So I think it's really important to think about what Elise said. When something in their life makes them think a lot more about Stanford, kid applying, or retirement maybe, and there's more time. Maybe you're moving to a new city. Is there something we can do for you when you move to a new city and kind of interest you and engage you based on that, based on your life change? Career transitions are a big one. We think that's a way we can start to engage some of these remotes, right? So our little bit of fundraising nugget, again, we're separate from the development office, but we do a voluntary contribution campaign for our Stanford magazine, essentially asking alums to donate to the Stanford magazine a couple times a year, just to kind of same as a nonprofit model, try and keep the magazine great and keep it going. So 28% of owners have made a donation to the magazine and only 1% of remotes. So I don't actually have the fundraising information, how this breaks down, but it's not going to surprise you, I'm sure, that when you look at the overall giving at Stanford, it's going to follow some interesting patterns. Yeah, Florencia.
How do you know that info about remotes if you don't have the contact info? Is it through the jumpers? Or?
Oh, the question is, how do I know this about the remote since we don't have their contact info? So this still, we still have everybody in our database against their Stanford ID, so we know who they all are. Yep. Yeah, so some have contact info, some don't. We even have some owners who don't weirdly have contact info in there, but we have their ID. Good question. Other questions on that? So it's just kind of interesting from a fundraising perspective, what you might do with this. So what you might be able to see about, you can always ask them more about it, what they care. Once you understand more about what they care about, then sort of match that. That goes back to sort of the intelligence side of that. How do you understand more about what they want from Stanford and then serve that up across your institution in a concerted way? So we also discovered we might not be hearing from all alumni equally. So when we do these survey efforts, I mentioned remotes definitely respond to our surveys, which is great, but in much smaller numbers than owners, banner carriers, and socials, in much smaller numbers than the more engaged segments. So what we found is we actually have to oversample those segments, right, when we're doing surveys. So we have to ask more remotes to get the same or roughly the same amount of remotes to answer our surveys so that we even understand what they want and what we know. So So beware of what you don't know, I guess, what you might not be hearing from your alums that might be skewed behaviorally and what you're hearing back from folks. So, and once again, back to the remotes, who we really think are a pretty interesting segment. We surveyed grad-only remotes and found that 22% of those feel a stronger affiliation with Stanford than with their undergrad institution. So, most alums, remotes included, feel a stronger affiliation with their undergrad institution. But when we look at some grad-only remotes, we have a really intriguing subsegment here that actually feel stronger about Stanford than with their undergrad institution. Yet they're behaviorally not very engaged with Stanford, right? So that's a great sort of segment that we can go after and sort of think about, well, what would we do differently? How would we take that affinity and turn it into something, right? Turn that into a way that they could engage that might even move them to a different point in the model. So that's sort of a few things we've learned. Now I'd like to bring it back to social media, back to our world specifically here, and tell you a little bit about a post last year. Actually, I can tell you, so our 3 most commented upon posts of 2014 were all things that were sort of moments, milestones, that really resonated with, I would say, the classes in the 70s and the 80s. So kind of tying back to some things Brent shared with us earlier, which was really interesting. One of these was, so we have this library on campus, I should say had, past tense, this library that was, maybe not the most attractive library on campus. In fact, it was nicknamed Ugly by the earlier classes. It was undergraduate library, right? So it made sense, ugly, but also maybe a little bit about the way it looked. But anyway, so, people had very strong emotional connection to this building, right? It's a place that they spend a very important part of their lives. They had stories about it. So campus just thinks about, well, we're gonna, bulldoze this old library and make way for something else. That happens all the time at campus, but there's this amazing outpouring of support from alums about it and memories and thoughts and what they care about. So this was actually our most commented upon post of 2014. Interesting, the other 2 in the top 3 comment-wise were the passing of a beloved admissions dean, Dean Fred, who was in the 70s and the 80s, and then actually the Loma Prieta earthquake anniversary. So those of you Californians know that earthquakes are strong emotional connection, and people had a lot of stories to share about where they were that day. But back to this one, the demolition of Meyer Library, we put out a call. So essentially, good night, Meyer, due to seismic conditions, we're going to be tearing this building down. We had some, logistics about where we have a 24-hour study room, so where that 24-hour study room is going to be relocated. A lot of alums had experience there. And then just made a very simple call, right, and just said, any Meyer memories. So very lean, even if you don't read the meat of the post in the middle there, we're just saying, good night, Meyer, any Meyer memories, ? And just kind of put that call out. And people took that call, they really listened, and they sent, it wasn't quick little one-liner comments. It was these big, meaty comments. We're getting to know a lot about them. And so most commented upon posts, many shares. And then what we did is did it in a more manual way than what Brent can offer. But we actually went and we're looking people up manually to find out who they were. So matching that social engagement and these wonderful stories that people are sharing with the data in our alumni database, once again, through the lens of the segmentation model. So we got to see, here's kind of how the alumni commenters broke down, right? Vast majority are owners, banner carriers, and socials, actually in that order, which is kind of interesting, right? So owners, again, back to people who are extremely engaged with the institution via dollars, via time, via different ways. So, but extremely engaged with the institution. Banner carriers are your core of your volunteers, think of it that way. Socials, of course, are some of our most engaged folks. And then what's intriguing to me, even though these numbers aren't high of these other segments I've been telling you about today, we also get some remotes. We even get some in the ether. That's a little slice there. They're coming up. Brent, yeah. No, they don't get credit for this. They don't get credit for this. They should. They should. Once we can get it into the database, darn it all. So we're getting a little bit of these folks, even a little bit of quid pro quo, surprisingly, right? So this is very intriguing. So not only can we get this into the database and start giving them credit for this, we can really understand, back to the question in the back, what they're interested in, what they care about. And next time, you can imagine, if we have anything about the Meyer Library demolition, we had a magazine article, we know who to talk to. We know who cares about this. So that's very important. And just for a little bit of fun, I thought I would ask you, this is sort of a little game we'll play, so you can just raise your hands and those on the live stream can tweet at us with the hashtag for this. But I just want to tell you a quick tale of two comments. So these are two specific comments, two specific stories that were shared with us, and I'll read them for you in a minute, from alums out there. And I want you guys to guess which of these is the owner, the most engaged segment in our model, and which of these is the remote, the second least engaged, right? So two comments, right? So let me read the first one. So the bats, the band during Dead Week, waiting in the queue for the first Apple computers, riding the elevator with John Elway, the dummy thrown off the top floor before it was sealed off, and not much studying. Green was for serious studying, Meyer for socializing. Okay, that's the story. One of them is that the owner's at the remote. Second one is, I was the guy that did the dummy off the top floor. They didn't actually respond to each other. These were totally separate times, but this kind of a celebrity, the guy who did that. Late 70s, I got up and yelled so everyone would come to the open area about how I couldn't take pre-med anymore during Dead Week. Dead Week is our week right before finals week, by the way. And threw a dummy dressed like me over the balcony. It was a little too real in the execution, and I felt kind of guilty about it, especially hearing the reaction of those in the library. Glad I didn't get in trouble for the stunt. No statute of limitations, by the way. We can still, no, just kidding. So that's kind of interesting. So, all right, who among you thinks that the owner is the top comment and the remote is the bottom one? All right, so for the live stream folks, it looks like that's about, maybe a little less than half, maybe about half. And how many of you think the opposite of that? So the remote's the top one and the owner is the bottom one. Okay, a little bit less on that one. I'll have to run out to the tag board, the tweet wall real quick to check the live stream audience, see what they say. But actually that first group is right. The owner's the top one. Owner's class of 85, and the bottom one is a remote class of 76. So let me ask real quick, of those of you who said that, anyone want to share the reasoning behind that? Why you might have thought that was, yeah, let me go here and then here.
The fact that they were, oh, hey, I
Yeah.
can actually use the microphone.
Ooh, the fact that they were listing off all these specific things meant they're still kind of reminiscing over that they're still connected to the school.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Strong emotional connection, right? For
Exactly.
sure. With that, listing that off. Thank you. Yep.
I can project.
Okay.
It's sort of like their whole experience is punctuated by these moments
Mhm.
that define their entire Stanford experience, and so that to me is the attitude of an owner.
Yeah.
They can sit there and rattle off all kinds of stories, and it's fresh, and it's as if it happened yesterday.
Yeah, that's a great way to look.
Adam, we have somebody back here.
That's true. Great rationale.
Definitely
Okay, we
because
got in the far back.
Yeah, also the remote rider is kind of feeding off of the owner. Maybe he saw the picture and then kind of had the memory and then saw that someone even mentioned himself and he was like, oh my God. So it's really great because the remote person feeds off of the owner. So it's almost like this guy's being a social ambassador without even knowing it.
Right, exactly. And is this the hook, that starts to bring that person in? Now we've had the social hook, we've discovered the interest. Now what can we use to change the behavior, right? And again, behavioral change, anyone who's tried to go to the gym at the beginning of January and stick with it all the way to December knows that's challenging. Behavior is hard to challenge. But this gives us somewhere to start. There is some common ground here to bring it in. Anybody else on the rationale? Very great points. Oh yeah, over here.
It has to do with socializing. And the last word in the first one. I mean, an owner is somebody who's going to be socially connected, and remain in that for years and years and years. Whereas the other guy sounds a little lonely.
Yeah. So. Good eyes. That's a great point. This can happen completely in isolation. You could see that person being far from other Stanford alums, but sort of participating in this. As back here. Good point. Thanks, Chris.
Well, it's because the one who mentioned the dummy thrown off the top was 85, and then the guy who actually did it was in 76, which means he's ingrained in the history of this.
Yeah.
So therefore, an owner who would take time to figure out the institution and the rich history.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's an interesting lever, too. Is there something we can do there about who's been part of the Stanford history over time, right? And sort of pull people back in that way. Because that is, again, back to if you look at our 3 most commented upon posts, all very much milestones, moments of the university that people are sharing, from wherever they are, which is kind of cool. So they're sharing these as stories as part of a community that extends around the world, which that is what it is. So the big interesting question here too is what does this mean? Like two people, I mean, these comments, it stumped enough of you that it was kind of hard to determine, which is which. How could people who have look so similar on social and what they're sharing have such vastly different trajectories in alumnihood behaviorally? What does that mean and what can we do with that? So it's very interesting how we might be able to, number one, map this, capture this data, get it into the database so we understand, and then act upon it by, again, back to the big goal, help alumni have the relationship they want to have with Stanford. Get them more information that they want to have, engage them in different ways, lightweight ways, ways that are perfect for social media. So that's about it. And where we're going with all of this, what we hope to do is, back to what I was mentioning at the beginning, really join up the various efforts of digital, from data to social to web, and be able to act on this in everything from our web recommendations to dynamic emails that we can send them that has just the right kind of mix that's based on the behavioral data and that interest data that we can be feeding to them. Look at new ways, look out for new opportunities. Maybe we'll learn some here and I can take it back with me to think about ways to, what do I do with those remotes who are on social media? What are some new ways to engage them in various kinds of social media, right? Not just the Facebook folks. So looking at ways to transform this relationship across Stanford, and for what it's worth, help our campus partners do that. So not just the Alumni Association, but everybody on the Stanford campus. And one question I'll throw out to you too is, let's just, for the sake of today, assume you've done the same exercise, you have these segments, you have your own remotes. Often when I talk about this, by the way, people immediately think of someone, oh, I know this individual who I know is a remote. So often they think about that immediately. But let's say you have your own remotes, you have your own quid pro quo segment, your own intellectual segment, your own social segment, your own owners. I'm sure you all have owners and you know them well. Your own banner carriers. What would you guys do? I'm just kind of curious to hear from you. Anyone have ideas on how you might approach marketing differently, programming differently, or especially social media? What might you do if you have people who are sharing these wonderful stories on social, engaging with us on social? What might you do to help change their underlying behavior with your institution? Any brave souls? Tough question. Yeah.
I think for the remote, I think it's a matter of looking at what their interests are, and then I think you said it, what within the university you have as far as programming that you can share with them to increase their engagement. And the more and then engage them that way, they'll ultimately, maybe they'll give.
Yep. What are they interested in that you can match them with that is existing? And I think that's a really smart way to go about it. Instead of trying to, it's expensive to build out things you don't know if they're going to work. You can actually find what's on your campus, which all of us have rich, activities and information that we can get to them, content. So what can we find and match up with them? I think that's a really great point. And that's what we're trying to do too at Stanford, try to map that, make some partnerships across campus. Because we also think with remotes, it's about relevance, right? It's about some specific relevance to what they have done. What is their piece of Stanford, which may not just be Stanford or the school that they're part of, or even their program. It may be about something more like a lab group that they were part of as an alum. Who knows what that's going to be. So are the skies going to open up on us at some point here? Yikes. Great. So yeah, back here.
Right here. Oh, thanks. I can yell.
Thanks, Lee.
After you designed this tool and figured out who your alums were, and then you kind of talked about changing your programming to fit these different circles, how do you then analyze your programs to make sure that you're, doing what you guys intended?
Yeah, that's a great point. So it's from a few levels. So we would look at it at the program level. Think about it as sort of who's your best customer, right, from a marketing perspective. So just analyzing it and seeing which of these segments are actually taking us up on the offer, finding more people like them, right? So you're trying to expand that reach. So if you're trying to drive revenue in a program, okay, our best customer looks like this. Where do we find others? And we've actually built some models that are sort of, scored maybe on, okay, the people who most look like who you're after are these folks, then the next level down, then the next level down. So let's say you're doing some kind of a marketing offer, a mailing or an emailing, you can sort of build your population based on that, sort of with a dial. So that's sort of at the more the program level. But we also looked at this and used this and other tools and other ways to look at data within our organization, but at the investment level, at the program portfolio level. So we do really try to see who are all of our programs reaching. In certain programs, maybe if it's only reaching one particular segment, and if a lot of other stuff is reaching, that particular segment, I wouldn't say this would be a reason alone to sunset something, but it would be, one of the factors in many to sort of say, hey, are we serving this one group 10 times over and this other group 0 times over? And you might move some actual institutional dollars to something else, right? That something else could be trying to build something new or finding something else on campus to sort of partnership with, that to try to reach these guys. Or small investment in social, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where your social media investment comes in. Great question. Yeah, over here, then here.
So I may have totally zoned, but where does what's the tool that allows you to determine that they're a remote or or social? And if you don't have any of this stuff, how do you start?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So
two questions.
Two questions. Two great questions. So first great question, I would say, we are using our old advanced database. So many of you probably know and love advanced, right? We have the version 1 literally of advanced. So we're sort of doing this manually as a workaround. So don't use the tool that we're using. We're doing this essentially somewhat manually using the ID list, the population containers within our advanced database, right? So it's really about building queries to do this. So there are ways actually to do this to get started. You could do this even very simply with an Excel spreadsheet. You can almost do the audit, right, of what behaviors you have. Even just defining the behaviors and trying to categorize them might be a useful exercise without having to even get into this depth, but just saying, what do we know and what don't we know? And then categorizing that into, see if you can find some segments emerging, right? So you can start just at a very high level. The other thing I do hope you can take away today is not having to do this at all, but just go home and say, let's pretend I have remotes. What do I do with those folks? How do I start to understand them across social? How do I start to understand what I might do differently in my marketing efforts with them, right? Good question, thanks. And I'm back over here. Yep. Oh.
That was actually one of my 2 questions, but
Okay.
So thank you. But I was also curious, just thinking like my manager might,
Yeah.
what was the cost, both financially, and it sounds like if you're using a homemade system, maybe not too much additional cost, but
Right.
or an existing system, but also from a employee resource perspective to get something like this done,
Yeah.
which is so cool, by the way.
Cool.
And also, do the colors mean anything?
No, just trying to have a friendly color scheme for the afternoon of the first day of a company. Yeah. Yeah.
These are all fairly positive. Are there negative cohorts out there? Maybe not everybody has Stanford's level of rah-rah. Is that something you can add?
This is a really good point. So 2 kind of sides of this. So this is, are there negative areas, almost negative segments about feelings about that? Let me start with that one first and then get back to the cost question. So interestingly, we kind of looked at this when we did the research, sort of the qualitative research on top of the behaviors. The nice thing is the behaviors are more what they've actually done. So we try to keep it where we don't have anything that's more a feeling or the qualitative side in the behaviors so that we can just track it directly. But then we put the feelings on top of it because we were wondering, do remotes feel more disgruntled? Do owners sometimes feel more disgruntled than remotes at times? Are there bad feelings? Are there good feelings? So we kind of address that with the market research layer and then kind of look for subsegments within. So in other words, I didn't find any sort of systemic bad feelings that would lead to something that would shape behavior over time, which I think is a good thing, that would do that. It's a very interesting thought. I wonder if other schools would have that, possibly. I'd love to hear from folks over the course of the conference if you think you might, because we haven't thought of it that way. Very intriguing. And then the cost, so we do have a full-time staff member devoted to this and any other kind of data analysis. So we're lucky to have that for sure. But we also try to give back and spread that cost out so that we can help not only departments across the Alumni Association with these kind of systems, but also, again, campus partners elsewhere. So, and this is one of many systems. We also have email analytics that we do so we can understand demographics, as I mentioned earlier, different data, different views we can look at this with. We can build some models for our client programs and use all of these to just help them get to know who their customers are and how to help them have the relationship they want to have with Stanford. Good, good. All right, one more minute, last question, and then off to a break.
I'll take it.
Okay.
So you talked about 75% of remotes under 45 jumped to another segment, said it was life change related. I mean, do you find like within these different segmentations that you have a higher, like, you know, on average of like young alums who are in the ether versus, you know, owners who are older, more engaged, or is it spread across the segments? How does bio data, you know, interact with this?
So great question. How does bio and demographic data affect this? We really found that it's pretty demographic independent. So it really is, it seems to be something more about the person, right? It's something more about, you know, if you're a remote, you're probably a remote even as a student in some student flavor, right? And you graduate into remotehood and then you continue there. Or the other side, if you're an owner, you're kind of an owner when you're a freshman and you're doing ownery kind of things, and then you graduate and then you start doing owner kind of things with a young alumni group, right? So you kind of follow that. But the really interesting thing in your question too is there anything we can do to sort of affect that, right? So we've often wondered, if we find that and someone is a remote early on, is there something we could do that could sort of bump their trajectory off so that they have a different, you know, a different path than those two comments you saw, where the owner and the remote are very similar in their comments, but very different in their alumni behavior trajectory. So, good question. All right, any more questions? Tweet at me or come and talk to me. Thank you for your time.
Adam Miller. Glorious as always. Thank you, Adam. Thanks for everyone that tuned in, and we'll be streaming again tomorrow. So come on back to Higher Ed Live and Case SMC, a powerful partnership. So we are now another 15-minute break, and then we'll do breakout sessions. I believe, Elise, you are here.